Have any of you given that Bumble app a go? I know it seems wildly counterintuitive to download an app where the girl has to make the first move, especially when that's not usually the case, but I can honestly say it's been worth it. That said, the single worst thing that happened to me in 2020 came directly from a Bumble date. So it all kicked off when I matched with a girl from Luxembourg named Zaya. After a couple of days of chatting, we decided to meet up at a little cafe in Soho for a few coffees. We hit it off right away, chatting about everything and nothing, like we'd known each other for years. 1 hour turned into 2, then 3, and neither of us was ready to call it a night. Neither of us drank alcohol that evening, she for religious reasons, me because I'm a bit of a fitness nut. While she sipped on mocktails, I was hammering the espressos. Eventually, I needed to relieve myself so badly, I was nearly doing the entire river dance in front of the one-person toilet door. This happened every 30 minutes, on the dot, throughout the night. I had to keep interrupting our conversation, apologizing as I darted off to the loo. I felt ridiculous having to dash off so often, but every time I came out, she just smiled and waved me off with a bit of light teasing, joking that I had the bladder of a toddler. But then, one time I came out of the restroom, and she wasn't alone. Someone was sitting in my seat. At first, I thought she'd bumped into a friend. She looked pretty at ease talking to him. But nope, it was the total opposite. I walked up behind him, placed my hands on his shoulders in a playful way and said, "I think you're in my seat there, mate." Not aggressive, just a bit of banter. I expected him to smile, maybe introduce himself, or at least step away. Instead, he turned and gave me this look like I'd just spat in his drink. And then Zaya gave me a look, one that said, "Help." That's when I realized they didn't know each other. Apparently, he'd been sitting alone, having some tapas and wine, and had been making eyes at Zaya. When I went off for yet another bathroom break, he seized the opportunity, slid into my seat, and started flirting with her in a way she later described as so over the top it made her want to throw up her nojito. I had to ask this guy, politely at first, to leave us alone. He eventually got up, but not before trying to stare me down. I had a few inches on him, and yes, that's height, you degenerates, and I knew from one look he hadn't touched a dumbbell in years. He was trying so hard to be some fantasy version of a heartthrob, it was laughable. Like a chocolate pistol, looked dangerous but would melt under pressure. But as I found out later, looks can be dangerously misleading. After that awkward moment, Zaya and I laughed it off and carried on with our evening. She could see over my shoulder and kept tabs on whether the guy was still there. I couldn't see him, just the wall behind her, so I had to trust her updates. I figured he'd leave after being publicly humiliated, but he didn't. He stayed, still watching. Then when I walked Zaya home through Times Square, he got up, paid, and followed us. I looked over my shoulder, and yep, there he was again. He tried to keep up the intimidation game, glaring from under his brow, but he was too drunk to pull it off. It was more comical than threatening. Still, we were being tailed, and it was unsettling. When we reached her building, I asked if she was okay going in with him, possibly seeing where she lived. She admitted she wasn't thrilled about it, but said with 50 or 60 apartments, the odds of him figuring out which one she was in were slim. Surprisingly, she was more concerned about me. She invited me up for a nightcap, not to hook up, just to play it safe. I wasn't going to turn that down. We sat in her apartment for about an hour, sipping some bizarre ginger tea and checking from her bathroom window to see if he was still down there. He wasn't. We assumed he'd finally gotten bored and left. We kissed goodnight, and I started my walk home feeling like I was floating. But then I thought, imagine if that freak is still following me. I glanced over my shoulder, and 50 or 60 meters back, there was a silhouette that looked a lot like him. I stopped and waited. He walked under a streetlight. It was him. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, loud enough for him to hear. He froze. I told him to back off, and that there'd be no problems if he just left me alone. Then I continued walking. Every now and then I glanced back. He was still there, still following, and slowly closing the distance. My apartment was the top 2 floors of a vintage brownstone in Harlem, and if he saw which door I went into, he'd know exactly where I lived. So I turned around, marched toward him, and gave him a piece of my mind, told him he was being a creep. It seemed to work. He turned and walked away. I checked again as I neared a small park just before my place. He was gone, or so I thought. Halfway through the park, everything went white. I felt my knees buckle like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. I don't know if I blacked out, but when I came to, there was searing pain in the back of my head. I'd been hit, hard. At first, I thought I was being mugged. My instincts kicked in, and I tossed my wallet and phone toward the concrete. Then I heard him laugh. His voice confirmed it. "I thought you were gonna kick my head in. Look at you now." Then whack. He kicked me so hard in the face, I thought I'd lose my eye. The force knocked me back, and my mouth filled with blood. My teeth scraped together, some were chipped. I spat and tried to stand, using a nearby fence for support. Then he jumped on me again. This time, he didn't strike. He held something sharp, maybe a knife, right to my eye and whispered the most vile, gloating things imaginable. He referenced Zaya. He was completely unhinged. Then, for some reason, he stopped. He said I was lucky he was letting me live. One more punch to the face, and he ran. I staggered to find my phone. It was smashed but still barely functional. I called 999 and collapsed on a park bench until help arrived. Aside from a concussion, chipped teeth, and a face that looked like I'd gone 10 rounds with a prize fighter, I was okay. The doctor said the first strike came from something like a brick, and that if it had landed slightly harder, I might not have survived. He got 6 years for assault and grievous bodily harm. Zaya and I dated for a few more months, but she had to move for work. The 4 dentist visits were miserable, and the court dates were worse. But the biggest takeaway? One harmless-seeming date can spiral into months of trauma. Bumble? No thanks. I'm done with that app. I once went on a Bumble date with a guy who looked like a Disney prince raised in a biker bar. I swear, he was the most stunning man I'd ever seen. Tall, chiseled jaw, tattoos covering most of his arms and neck. I wasn't even surprised when he casually mentioned he'd done 18 months in Maricopa County Jail for some BS where a guy got stabbed. That was his exact phrasing. I know, enormous red flag. But I didn't care. He was so ridiculously attractive that it short-circuited my better judgment. Plus, I've always had this skeptical view of the justice system in the US, so I told myself, maybe it was just a misunderstanding. We met for drinks in Echo Park. He was sweet, paid for everything, and acted like a complete gentleman. Unlike a lot of guys who spend the entire date talking about themselves, he kept asking me questions. What I was into, where I went to school, what kind of music I liked. It was refreshing. When I told him I played classical guitar and had performed in a few concerts back in college, his eyes genuinely lit up. I still play a lot, though these days I lean more toward gypsy jazz than Rodrigo y Gabriela. I mentioned that my grandmother was from Andalusia, and that flamenco had always felt like something passed down in my blood. He told me, "Your passion is captivating." I melted a little inside. It felt good to be seen. After a couple more drinks, the conversation got looser, more playful. He walked me to my Uber at the end of the night, and I was debating whether to kiss him when he suddenly said, "If I wanted you to remember me forever, I'd break your ring fingers. They don't heal right, so every time you played, you'd think of me." I just stood there, completely blank. For a second, I wasn't even sure I'd heard him right. I laughed nervously, thinking, okay, maybe that was just a really dark joke. But it was the kind of comment that smacks of hidden intent. The way an ex once told me I had fat thighs, then tried to backtrack by saying he was joking. It had that same gross energy. I meant it, but now that you're visibly uncomfortable, I'll pretend I didn't. I told him I'd see him again, and I think I actually believed it at the moment. But over the next few days, after relaying the story to girlfriends and thinking it through, the red flags were blinding. I kept circling back to the fact that he had already been to jail, and not just that, but over a violent incident. I didn't block him or delete his contact. I just stopped responding, ghosted him basically, left him on read, and hoped that would be the end of it. Here's where it gets chilling. There's a Facebook group in Los Angeles where women share warnings about men who've acted violently or inappropriately on dates. It's not a witch hunt or anything. It's more like a community safety net. If someone gets harassed or assaulted, they post about it to alert others. Less than a week after my date with Tattoo Prince, a post starts trending in the group. That usually means something really bad has happened, or occasionally really good, like a known predator finally getting jailed. This time it was bad. Disturbingly bad. A girl had uploaded screenshots of a Tinder profile, along with a story about how the guy had gotten aggressive when she wouldn't go back to his place. He'd grabbed her wrist, said some truly disgusting things, and when she called him out, he hit her. In the face. It was him. The guy I'd gone on a date with. The guy who made that weird comment about breaking my fingers. My stomach flipped as I kept reading. Turns out he wasn't on probation for the stabbing incident. No, he was on probation for indecent assault. That was the real conviction. And that could have been me. That could have been me alone with him in some dimly lit parking lot, or in his apartment, or worse. After that, I started digging. Turns out a lot of court records in California become public after a certain period. I learned how to look up prior arrests, convictions, and even mugshots through county databases. It's not as hard as you might think. So here's my advice. If a guy casually mentions having run-ins with the cops, don't brush it off. You can find out if he's telling the truth. You can find out what he's hiding. I'm not saying every guy with a record is a monster, but you deserve to know what you're walking into. Ladies, trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And if a guy ever jokes about hurting you, so you'll never forget him, don't give him the benefit of the doubt. Run. Back in the spring of 2018, I was living in a tiny, overpriced apartment in Manhattan's East Village with my best friend in the entire world. We'd both moved to New York around the same time, two small-town girls trying to make it in the big city, and instantly bonded over our matching accents and mutual confusion about subway transfers. She was from a little place outside Asheville, North Carolina, and I was from a small town just over the state line in Virginia. We'd both grown up with dirt roads, bonfires, and Friday night football games. We had similar senses of humor, similar taste in music, and the kind of friendship that just clicked. But there was one major difference between us. She missed home. She missed her family, her friends, the quiet. Me? I didn't miss home one bit. My family was a mess, though it wasn't entirely their fault. We'd gone through something terrible when I was a kid, a trauma that left a permanent scar. The truth is, meeting her was a gift. But after a while, we both started to feel the absence of male attention, if you catch my drift. New York isn't exactly the kind of place where you can strike up a conversation with a stranger without risking winding up in someone's freezer. So we downloaded dating apps. I found Tinder and Hinge a little overwhelming, but my roommate had better luck with Bumble. She liked having the power to message first, and before long, she matched with a guy who seemed pretty ideal. He was handsome, well-read, and southern, just like us. He said he'd moved around a lot as a kid and didn't really claim any one place as home. He sounded great, and after a few dates, she brought him back to our apartment. It was a Friday night, and I was lounging on the couch watching Stranger Things and devouring a bag of Milano cookies. She walked in with him, and we exchanged hellos. He was polite, charming, and a little quiet, but nothing out of the ordinary. Except something about him felt familiar. And now, I need to take a moment to explain why. When I was 6 years old, my 10-year-old brother, Emery, was murdered. His killer was someone we knew, a neighborhood kid who'd been over to our house more than once. His name was Dustin Ridge, and he had these deep, ink-black eyes that I used to think were cool, like the kind you'd see on a cartoon vampire. After Emery died, my parents sent me to stay with my grandparents for a few days. When they finally picked me up, they told me Emery had gone to live with Grandma in heaven. At the time, I didn't fully understand what that meant. I was sad, but death was still abstract, like a long trip someone might return from. That changed once I got older and started learning just how horrific Emery's death really was. Dustin had confessed to everything. He and Emery had been playing near the train tracks by our old elementary school when he picked up a heavy iron object, a discarded rail joint plate, and for reasons he could never clearly explain, used it to strike Emery in the back of the head. Then, in a cold, calculated panic, he kept going. He thought he'd get in trouble, so he hid the evidence. But what he did next was straight out of a horror film. The police later discovered Emery's body had been mutilated, his eyes removed, fingers broken, and worse. Much worse. Some of the details I only learned through whispered rumors. Others were confirmed in court documents I found online when I was older. My family never really talked about what happened after the trial. They just fell apart. Dustin was sent to juvenile detention in another state. Because he was so young, the court granted him a new identity when he turned 18. A fresh start, supposedly. But those eyes? I never forgot them. They haunted my dreams for years. They'd show up in nightmares, floating black orbs, always watching. I used to imagine he'd come for me next. He got one sibling, and now he was coming for the other. Which brings us back to that Friday night. As we chatted in the living room, something about my roommate's Bumble date kept tugging at me. It was the eyes, his mannerisms, the way he seemed to shrink a little when asked about his childhood. Then I mentioned I was from rural Virginia. He froze. It wasn't obvious, just a slight change in his expression. But to me, it was like a window swinging open. "Torrance," I blurted out. That had been Dustin's middle name. I don't know why I said it, but it slipped out before I could stop myself. His eyes, those eyes locked onto mine. It was him. He stood up abruptly. "I should go," he said, avoiding eye contact. My roommate was totally confused. "Wait, what's going on? Who's Torrance?" I followed him to the door, heart pounding, and whispered, "Don't come back." Then I collapsed onto the floor. Later, I told my roommate everything. I had to. It was the only way she would understand why I'd reacted the way I did. I explained who Dustin, now going by another name, really was. What he'd done to my brother. What he'd taken from my family. She was horrified, but she believed me. We sat there in stunned silence, trying to process how low the odds were that of all the apartments in all the boroughs in New York City, my roommate would bring home the one person who'd destroyed my childhood. It felt like the universe had twisted itself into a cruel joke. She never saw him again, of course, and as disturbing as that night was, it brought us even closer. She helped me feel safe again. She reminded me that even when the past comes knocking, I'm not alone anymore. So here's the moral. You never truly know who you're meeting on an app. They could be anyone. They could be charming, smooth, attractive, and still have blood on their hands. Literal blood. Saturday nights in downtown Portland can transform the whole city into another world. In the daylight, you'll see parents walking hand in hand with their kids, professionals sipping espresso outside of bookshops, and joggers weaving their way through tree-lined blocks. But when the sun disappears behind the hills, the streets switch personalities. Orange streetlights flicker to life, casting their glow over alleyways now teeming with stumbling drunks, wide-eyed partygoers, and those who've lost track of both time and sobriety. I hadn't planned on going out that night, but it was my friend Marcus's 21st birthday, kind of a rite of passage, so I figured I'd show up for a couple of drinks and ditch before things got too wild. I wasn't exactly thrilled about it, but I didn't want to come off like a total killjoy. Honestly, it wasn't so bad once we got going. The first few beers helped, and there was something oddly exciting about using our Real IDs instead of nervously flashing the janky fake ones we'd gotten from a guy who ran a vape shop. Plus, the bar was packed with people who looked like they'd stepped off the set of a fashion shoot. I couldn't help but notice how stunning the women were: bartenders, servers, patrons. It was like every corner held someone who could have been on a magazine cover. Then I saw her. She was alone on the dance floor, moving like the music had taken over her soul. Short black dress, pastel pink pixie cut, and a rhythm that was magnetic. She looked like she didn't need anyone's attention, which only made her more captivating. I knew it was impolite to stare, but my eyes betrayed me. I was locked in. Of course, my friends noticed. They started ribbing me, giving me grief for not making a move. "Bro, she's literally at the bar now. This is your shot." Marcus shoved me forward so hard I nearly spilled my drink. I decided I'd rather risk rejection than spend the rest of the night being mocked. I took one last swig of beer, ran a hand through my hair, and casually slid next to her at the bar. I started with a throwaway line about the bartender being MIA and how I was dying of thirst. She laughed. Pale blue eyes, barely taller than 5 feet. She introduced herself as Lila. I offered her a drink, and she said yes. She told me she was waiting on friends who were fashionably late, and I told her it looked like she didn't need anyone else to have a good time. Our conversation flowed surprisingly well, flirty, light, and easy. When a new track started pumping through the speakers, Lila's eyes lit up. "This is my jam," she shouted, grabbing my wrist and pulling me back toward the dance floor. We danced. We drank. We danced some more. I forgot all about Marcus's birthday until I caught him giving me a thumbs up from across the club. That was all I needed to really let go. By midnight, Lila and I were pressed into a shadowy booth, kissing like we were the only people in the world. She pulled out her phone and ordered a rideshare to her apartment. I didn't hesitate. It felt surreal, me, the guy who usually stayed home playing video games, living out some kind of fantasy. We laughed. We stumbled. We shed our clothes without much ceremony. Her sheets were soft, her perfume lingered in the air, and for that brief moment, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. We passed out tangled together, lips still tasting faintly of vodka and lime. The next morning, I woke up to silence and a hangover that felt like my skull was caught in a vice. I blinked blearily, searching for Lila, but the bed was empty. No note, no text, nothing. Then I heard the jingle of keys in the front door. I smiled, figuring she was back from grabbing coffee or something. But the voice that came next wasn't hers. It was a man's voice, deep, loud, and angry. He shouted her name like he owned the place. My stomach turned to stone. I bolted upright, heart pounding, and frantically started pulling on my clothes. This was bad. Very bad. The guy was coming home expecting to see his girlfriend, or wife, and instead he was about to find me, a half-naked stranger in her bed. There was only one place to hide, the closet. I squeezed in, trying to quiet the sound of my own breathing. Through the slats in the door, I saw him stomp into the bedroom. He was massive, covered in tattoos. Built like someone who didn't just lift weights, he destroyed them. That was terrifying enough, but then I noticed the garments hanging next to me. Military uniforms. Old ones. Some had epaulets with symbols I didn't recognize. But one stood out. A red armband with a black swastika inside a white circle. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I reached for my neck. My gold necklace, my great-grandfather's necklace, wasn't there. The Star of David. I'd taken it off before bed, and now it was sitting right there on the nightstand. Panic surged. I watched as the man scanned the room, his eyes narrowing. He could sense something was off. I couldn't breathe. I bit down on my lip, hard, to stop myself from making a sound. Suddenly, he called out for Lila again and left the room. I took my chance. Shaking, I dashed out of the closet, snatched the necklace, and ran to the window. 3rd floor. I had 2 options: break my leg or get murdered by a neo-Nazi. I chose the leg. I jumped. By some miracle, or because it was trash pickup day and there were piles of black bags below, I survived with a few scrapes and bruises. Weeks later, in one of my college lit classes, we were discussing the Odyssey. Our professor described how the sirens lured sailors to their deaths with beauty and song. I thought of Lila, and I understood completely. 2 summers ago, I matched with a girl on Bumble while living in Seattle. I'd tried Tinder and Plenty of Fish before, but I kept running into the same problem. No one wanted to actually meet up. It was all small talk and ghosting. So when I heard that Bumble gave women the power to start the conversation, I figured it might help filter out the ones who weren't genuinely interested. At first, it felt like more of the same, matches but no replies. But eventually, persistence paid off, and I matched with someone who seemed genuinely into me. Let's call her Maria. Maria was sweet, engaging, and passionate, especially about her hobbies. We didn't have a ton in common, but her excitement for the things she loved made me want to learn about them. Her biggest obsession was Japanese anime. I hadn't watched anything animated since the early 2000s, but I was fascinated by how detailed and dramatic some of the anime art could be. She was especially into a series called Attack on Titan. Huge people fighting regular-sized people, essentially, but drawn in a way that looked like museum art. We went on a few dates, and by the 4th one, she invited me back to her place in Capitol Hill. Within an hour, we were making out on her couch with some Netflix nature doc playing quietly in the background. Things were heating up until she suddenly pulled away, got up, and disappeared into her bedroom. I figured she was going to change into something more comfortable, or maybe freshen up. Instead, she came back out with her laptop. She smiled and said, "I want to show you something." Now, Maria had hinted that she was into some lewd stuff. Her words, not mine. So I thought maybe it was going to be some spicy artwork or a weird meme. What she showed me, though, was a folder full of anime-style drawings of semi-undressed characters, mostly girls, some with cat ears or tails. It was a bit unusual, but honestly, not unappealing. The drawings were well done, and I could see why she liked them. She told me it was kind of her fantasy, to recreate that aesthetic in real life, that she just needed to find the right guy to try it with. She looked at me in a way that made it clear she thought I might be that guy. I was blushing so hard I probably looked like I had a sunburn. I'd never done anything remotely experimental in past relationships, so the idea was exciting, if a little intimidating. We cuddled for a while after that, and when things calmed down, she invited me to sleep over. No expectations, just sleep. Later that night, though, I was still, let's say, unresolved. I didn't want to wake her or do anything weird next to her sleeping body, so I quietly got up and went into her living room to try and take care of things on my own. Her laptop was still there. I knew her password, Taro, the name of her late pet chinchilla, so I logged in and opened the same folder she'd shown me earlier. Only this time, I noticed something odd. The folder with the pictures she'd shared wasn't the only one. There were dozens of others, all named in what looked like Japanese or random symbols. One folder had no preview image at all, just a blank name like, or something. I hesitated. What if it had pictures of her? I didn't want to invade her privacy, but curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd take a quick peek, and if it was anything personal, I'd close it immediately. So I opened it. At first, it seemed like more of the same anime content. But then I opened a GIF. It started as a typical scene, a girl on her knees in front of a guy. But then the guy pulled out a gun and aimed it at her forehead. I froze. Before I could even react, he pulled the trigger. The GIF looped. The headshot, the gore, the continuation of the act, it just kept playing. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there stunned. I'm not squeamish, but this was something else. It wasn't just violent, it was gleeful in its violence. The animation was detailed to a grotesque degree. I reopened the laptop, thinking maybe it was a one-off. But the deeper I went, the worse it got. There were still images, before and after style. In one, a girl was restrained in a bizarre metal contraption. In the second image, she was clearly dead, dismembered, mutilated, organs spilling out in nightmarish detail. Some of the characters weren't even human. There were monsters, insects, things I didn't recognize. Then I noticed another folder tucked away at the bottom. Its label was just garbled text. I opened it. These weren't animated. They were real videos. Real deaths. Some of the videos looked like accidents, dashcam footage, falls, but most appeared to be actual murders. Executions. Torture. I couldn't even process what I was looking at until I read the accompanying text files. Someone, maybe Maria, maybe not, had written detailed commentary for each video. One note described how serene a victim's face looked after death, and how the author envied that stillness. Another referenced wanting to feel what it was like to take life and feel it stop under your hands. It wasn't just morbid curiosity. It was lust. I backed out, closed the laptop, and sat there breathless. Whatever fantasy Maria had shared earlier, that was the surface. This was the abyss. I quietly grabbed my things, snuck out, and never looked back. I blocked her on everything. For a few weeks, I felt kind of empty. I'd actually liked her. She was funny, creative, smart. There was real potential there. But that night cracked something inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd caught a glimpse of something I was never supposed to see. And the scariest part, I still don't know if she made that content or just consumed it. Either way, I couldn't stay. I walked into that community center basement because a flyer promised clarity. Find your purpose. Step into power. It sounded like every other self-help slogan I'd mocked in group chats. But that day I was tired, lonely, a little lost. The room smelled like old coffee and ambition. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle beneath buzzing fluorescent lights. On the wall, a banner read, "Unlock your potential." I almost turned around. Then I met her. Nairobi. She had presence. Silk scarf, wide grin, voice like she'd been a radio host before choosing a higher calling. She welcomed each person by name, despite it being our first time. When she greeted me, her eyes locked onto mine like I'd been expected. "Welcome," she said. "You're exactly where you need to be." The first few sessions felt harmless. We sat in a circle, scribbled on sticky notes, and shared what we were ready to release. Nairobi led breathing exercises and asked open-ended questions that lingered in my mind for days. She had a way of making you feel seen, like your struggles were valid and your dreams mattered. After one session, she pulled me aside. "You have natural resonance," she said. "You could coach others, help them find what you're beginning to see in yourself." I blinked. "I've barely started." "That's why it's perfect," she whispered. "You're still open." She invited me to a smaller group at her apartment. There were 6 of us, all regulars. The vibe was softer there, candles, herbal tea, ambient playlists. That night, she introduced the leadership circle. It was a coaching tier. We'd start guiding newcomers, sharing our stories, deepening our transformation. And yes, there was a commitment fee. But Nairobi framed it as investing in ourselves. "You're not paying me," she said. "You're paying the future you." I hesitated. She leaned forward. "Look around. Everyone here wants you to rise." I joined. At first, it felt empowering. I received a welcome kit, journals, incense sticks, access to a Slack channel called The Frequency. Nairobi gave me a title, Growth Liaison. I was assigned 3 new members to mentor and told to document their shifts. Then the pressure started. "True leaders don't dilute their energy," Nairobi said during a one-on-one. "Who around you isn't aligned." I knew what she meant. My friends had started teasing me about cult camp and the way I ended texts with ingratitude. Nairobi told me to take space. They don't get it, she said. Yet. I stopped replying to my oldest friend's messages. I skipped game night. When my sister asked if I was okay, I said I was in transition. Nairobi cheered me on. You're shedding the old, she said. That discomfort? It's growth. My days revolved around the group, coaching calls, Slack challenges, clarity sprints. Every week, we were evaluated with engagement scores. Nairobi would ping me. You're slipping. Is something blocking your channel? I pushed harder. Then came the expansion module. We were tasked with recruiting 3 new members each. Nairobi framed it as sharing the medicine. But when I didn't meet my quota, she sent a voice note. If you can't amplify your light, maybe you're not ready for leadership. I cried that night. Not because I doubted her, but because I thought I'd failed. The next week, I saw an old friend at the grocery store. Sarah. She looked surprised, then cautious. I've missed you, she said. I nodded, unsure what to say. I wanted to explain, to tell her I was doing something important. But when she said, you seem not like yourself, I just stood there. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next day, I posted in the Slack group about feeling overwhelmed. Nairobi messaged me immediately. Doubt is a toxin. Don't spread it. I logged out. I sat in my apartment, surrounded by affirmation cards and vision boards, and realized I didn't know what I believed anymore. So I went back to my old group chat. I sent a simple message. Hey, I think I got pulled into something weird. The replies came fast. We met for coffee that weekend. They didn't say told you so. They just listened. And when I cried ugly, heaving sobs, they didn't flinch. I left the group the next day. Nairobi sent one message. This will set you back. She was wrong. I emailed for a refund. It never came. I reported the group to a consumer watchdog. Maybe nothing will happen. But I needed to try. Weeks later, I signed up for a pottery class. No affirmations. Just clay and people who laughed when their mugs collapsed. It felt messy. Unscripted. Real. I'm still finding my way back. I still think about that Saturday. How the breeze flicked through the city park, the sky a pale autumn blue, and the grass dotted with folding chairs, tarps, and solar panels propped up like props in a school play. It was the annual Eco-Future Festival in Glenmere, a small but growing event where local environmental groups set up booths promoting everything from composting bins to biodegradable dish soap. I only went because my roommate, Juniper, insisted. It's good for your soul, she said, pressing a reusable water bottle into my hand like it was armor. She's the kind of person who wipes down her produce with vinegar and names her houseplants. I usually just recycle when I remember. I didn't expect to meet anyone memorable that day. But then I saw her, standing alone beside a large fabric banner that read, Clean Energy for All. The letters were hand-painted in bold green strokes, and the corners of the banner flapped like sails in the wind. Her name was Soraya. She wore a sun-faded cap made of recycled denim, her hair tucked under it in a loose bun. She was flipping through a stack of flyers with the focus of someone reviewing blueprints. When we made eye contact, she smiled, not the forced kind you use at networking events, but the kind that makes you feel like the world might still be okay. You interested in climate equity? She asked, offering me a flyer. Honestly, I said, I was just following the smell of vegan empanadas. She laughed, tucking the flyer into my hand anyway. Stick around. You might surprise yourself. That's how I ended up walking through a mini exhibition of wind turbine models and solar battery prototypes, following Soraya as she explained everything from carbon offsets to peer-to-peer energy trading. She spoke like someone who'd spent years building solutions instead of just tweeting about them. Every time she paused to answer a kid's question or waved to another volunteer, I liked her a little more. Eventually, she handed me a name badge and said, We're always looking for more hands. Only if you're serious, though. I'm not sure I'm activist material, I said. You showed up, she replied. That counts. Something about her presence made me want to try. I scribbled down my contact info, email, phone number, even my home address. She said they sent out welcome kits with reusable gear and a zine printed on seed paper. I figured it couldn't hurt. For the next few days, my inbox lit up with messages. Invitations to community energy workshops, beach cleanups, and research talks. I started attending them. I liked feeling useful. I liked feeling close to Soraya. I even started to believe I was part of something meaningful. I told my friends I was becoming a green citizen. Juniper beamed. Told you, she said, you just needed a cause. But then things got strange. It started with my phone battery. It drained faster than usual, even when I wasn't using it. I blamed the half-dozen new apps I'd installed: a local food map, an air quality tracker, a carbon footprint calculator. I closed background apps, turned off Bluetooth. It didn't help. Then I noticed something in my location history. According to my phone, I'd checked into a co-op 2 neighborhoods away at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. I hadn't left my house. Another time, it said I'd visited a city museum I hadn't been to in years. I started wondering if I'd left my phone somewhere, but it was always with me. One night, just to be sure, I turned my phone off and left it on my desk before bed. The next morning, my sleep app showed movement between 2 and 4 a.m., as if I'd been pacing. I hadn't. That's when the unease settled in. I went back to the emails Soraya had sent. One of them, a few days after the rally, included a link labeled Volunteer Hub. It opened a clean, minimal site with a calendar of upcoming events. I remembered clicking it. I'd even bookmarked it. But that same link, when I inspected it closely, had installed something, a small file buried deep in my phone's system settings. It had permissions I didn't recall approving, access to my GPS, my camera, even my microphone. And then I remembered something else. During the group photo at the festival, Soraya had asked me to keep my jacket on. For visual consistency, she said. It makes the photo look more unified. I hadn't questioned it. That night, I pulled the jacket out of my closet and turned it inside out, checking every seam. In the lining of the collar, I found a small square tag. It looked like a price tag, but when I peeled it off and held it to the light, there was something embedded inside, something metallic. I showed it to Juniper. She frowned. That's a passive GPS tag, like the kind used in package tracking. I felt my chest tighten. I think Soraya tagged me. Juniper didn't laugh. You need to talk to someone, she said. This isn't just environmental organizing. It's surveillance. I contacted a friend of hers who works in cybersecurity. She met me at a cafe 2 days later, bringing a portable scanner and a heat gun. She confirmed it. The tag was a commercial-grade tracker. Not illegal, she said, but definitely unethical, especially if you didn't consent. She also pulled up the app that had installed without my knowledge. It was disguised as a calendar widget, but was transmitting location pings every 10 minutes. I felt sick. I tried to reach Soraya. I texted, called, emailed. Nothing. I even returned to the park where we first met, hoping she might be organizing another event. All I found were scattered flyers and a few folding chairs stacked near the trees. I sat on the bench where we'd talked about community wind projects. I tried to remember if there were any signs, anything that should have clued me in. But all I could hear was the wind in the leaves and the low hum of traffic beyond the fence. That night, I started using a Faraday pouch. I carried a burner phone with no apps and left my main device in airplane mode. I bought a paper map of the city and plotted my movements by hand. I scribbled down appointments and addresses in a pocket notebook. I stopped using cloud storage. I terminated every app one couldn't trust. It felt absurd at first, like I was preparing for a spy movie, but I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. The tracker pinged for 2 more days before I destroyed it. My friend drilled a hole through the chip and used pliers to crack the casing. When it broke, I felt something inside me unclench. But the damage was done. I began to understand what Soraya had really built. Not a community, a network, a system of data points collected under the guise of activism, then sold. She wasn't just mapping pollution or public interest, she was mapping us. Our habits, our routes, our identities. My email inbox started filling with oddly specific messages. A startup offered me a free trial of biodegradable meal kits. Perfect for your rooftop garden, it said. I didn't have a rooftop. Another invited me to a fundraiser for data-driven climate outreach. The logo looked suspiciously similar to the one on Soraya's flyers. I stopped responding. I filed a complaint with the Provincial Privacy Office. They replied with a template. We are reviewing your submission. Please allow 90 days for investigation. I waited. I never heard back. Eventually, I returned to the park. The banners were gone. Only the cherry trees remained, their branches beginning to bear. I sat on the cold bench, watching the wind rustle a few leftover flyers across the grass. The first time I walked into the lecture hall at Northcote University, I thought I'd stepped into a scene from an old courtroom drama. The ceiling stretched up in arches, lined with ornate molding. Wooden benches creaked beneath students shifting in their seats, and portraits of long-gone deans stared down from the walls like they were still grading us silently. I'd enrolled in a weekend seminar called Property Law and the Future of Ownership on a whim, part boredom, part curiosity, and maybe a little pride in proving I could keep up with all the future lawyers in my city. I didn't expect to meet anyone interesting, let alone someone like Alira. It was during the second coffee break of the day, after a dense panel on legal personhood and asset protection, when I spotted her in the lounge, standing by a velvet couch that looked like it dated back to the 1800s. She wore a sharp navy blazer over a white turtleneck, and every movement she made seemed deliberate, like she was always 3 steps ahead of the room. She carried a leather-bound notebook filled with tight bullet point lists and underlined case citations. I was sipping a watery cappuccino, trying to decide if I should duck out early, when she caught my eye. "First seminar?" she asked, gesturing at my half-filled notebook covered in doodles and side notes. I laughed. "That obvious?" She grinned. "Don't worry, you're not the only one learning by osmosis." We started talking. She explained how she specialized in estate planning and asset protection for high-net-worth individuals. Think offshore trusts, prenups, family office shields. That kind of thing. It sounded glamorous, if slightly dystopian. I told her about my background, communications, not law, and how I'd always been fascinated by the intersection of money and morality. She raised an eyebrow and said, "You might be more of a client than a student." I laughed again, but something about the way she said it stuck with me. Over the next 2 days, we kept finding each other, during lunch breaks, after sessions, even once in the stairwell when everyone else took the elevator. She invited me to a small study group that met in the sunlit courtyard just off the library. We sat in a circle of wrought iron chairs, our phones silenced, our discussions ranging from intellectual property to international inheritance law. Alira was the kind of person who could make a clause in a 200-year-old contract sound like a plot twist. At the end of one session, she leaned in and said, "Eventually, everyone needs a prenup. It's just smart planning." I smiled awkwardly. "I'm not even dating anyone." She shrugged. "That's actually the best time to do it. No emotions to cloud your judgment." It sounded logical, like sunscreen or car insurance. Just in case. A couple of weeks later, we met for lunch at a narrow cafe that served falafel wraps with pickled onions and mint yogurt. Between bites, she told me more about her work, how she drafted agreements for couples who barely trusted each other to share a Netflix account, how she protected family legacies from messy divorces and international tax treaties. I was fascinated. Then she offered something unexpected. "I could draft a sample prenup for you," she said casually, sipping her sparkling water. "Free of charge. Just to show you what yours might look like, if you ever needed one." I hesitated. "Feels intense." "It's just a model," she said. "You can learn a lot about yourself from how you define boundaries." That line got me. I agreed. A week later, she emailed me a PDF titled, "Preliminary Prenuptial Agreement, Draft 1. 7 pages. Clean font. Clauses for every possible scenario. Division of property, spousal support limitations, even one about intellectual property created during the relationship. It read like a legal thriller. I skimmed it, impressed by how thorough it was. Then I reached page 6. There it was. "All premarital and marital assets shall, upon signing, be irrevocably transferred to the Alira Family Trust, domiciled in the Cayman Islands." My stomach twisted. I hadn't asked for anything offshore. I texted her, "Hey, what's this Cayman Trust thing? I thought this was just a sample." She responded almost immediately. "It's your choice. Just a placeholder. Totally optional. Trusts are standard in high-level planning." I breathed out. Okay, maybe it was just standard language. I asked her to revise it, remove the offshore clause. She agreed. "Sure, no problem." A few hours later, she sent a new version. I signed it electronically. I didn't think much of it after that. It was just a thought experiment, right? Months went by. I moved on to other projects. We stayed in touch, occasional texts, links to articles, a few memes about obscure court cases. Then one Thursday morning, my financial advisor called. "Hey," she said, "did you authorize a transfer of assets into an offshore trust?" My throat went dry. "No." "Why?" "Because your brokerage accounts are showing a transfer to an entity called EF Trust, registered in Georgetown, Grand Cayman." I checked my accounts. My savings were gone. My stock portfolio. Even the check I'd deposited from selling my old car. All gone. Moved. Legally. I called Alira. Voicemail. I emailed. No reply. I dug up the document she'd sent me. The revised prenup, the one I thought I'd signed, no longer opened. The link was dead. I checked my backups. The only version I had saved was the original one, with the Cayman clause. Panic swallowed me whole. I called her office. The receptionist told me she was traveling. She's in Zurich for a seminar. I left a message. Nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at my ceiling, trying to recall every word we exchanged. Every clause I'd skimmed too quickly. Every assumption I'd made. The next morning, she emailed. Hey, there's been a clerical error. The updated document wasn't saved properly. We'll reverse the transfer within the week. Don't worry. But it wasn't that simple. Reversing an offshore transfer isn't like undoing a Venmo payment. It involved legal filings in 2 countries, notarized letters, trustee approvals, and steep administrative fees. Each step moved slowly, deliberately. I hired a solicitor specializing in offshore law. She read the trust deed and looked at me gravely. This trust is irrevocable. That means you gifted your assets. They're no longer yours, unless the trustee agrees to release them, and they have no obligation to do so. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I searched the trust's name online and found a maze of shell companies and holding firms. All legal, all invisible. The trustee? A corporate entity with no phone number and a generic email. I sat in my kitchen for hours, staring at my account balance. 0. I had rent due in 5 days. Eventually, Alira responded again. I'm sorry this happened. It wasn't intentional. I'll do my best to help. But her tone had changed. It was colder, distant. She stopped promising timelines, stopped using words like we. I sent a formal request to the trustee, begging for the return of my funds. They replied 2 weeks later with a single paragraph. The settlor has no unilateral revocation rights. All decisions are subject to trustee discretion. I realized then I'd been outplayed. Not by a stranger, but by someone who knew exactly how to bend the rules, lace generosity with legal traps, and vanish behind a wall of procedure. I signed up for personal training because I wanted to feel like myself again. After a long winter of working from home, eating delivery, and pretending that stretching counted as exercise, I knew I needed help. So when I met Kian at Solace Fitness in downtown Edmonton, I figured he might be that push. He had a build that made you believe he knew what he was doing. Broad shoulders, posture like a soldier's, and a crisp, noble attitude. He said he used to be a corrections officer before pivoting into fitness. I've seen people break down, he told me during our consultation. I helped them rebuild now. I liked that. It made me feel like he wasn't going to judge my soft belly or my neglected cardio. He handed me a clipboard with a fitness assessment and a waiver, then pulled out a sleek tablet. To streamline everything, we do monthly autopay. You just sign here, and we get started. The form looked typical, some legalese, a signature field, and what I assumed were standard terms. I skimmed it, saw mentions of flex payment structure and performance incentives, but Kian was already moving on, explaining our first set of workouts. I signed, figuring it was just gym stuff. At first, Kian was exactly what I needed. We met twice a week. He had me doing bodyweight circuits, resistance training, and even introduced me to something terrifying called sled pushes. He kept a close eye on my form, corrected my posture with laser precision, and even sent motivational texts on off days. You're making progress, he'd write. Don't stop now. I started waking up sore but proud. My clothes hung looser. My energy returned. Kian made me feel like I was building not just muscle, but momentum. Then 3 weeks in, I got a notification from my bank. A large withdrawal, much more than our agreed-upon monthly fee, had gone through. I stared at the transaction details. Solace training, adjustment fee. I texted Kian. Hey, did the billing change? He replied almost instantly. Might be a tech glitch. I'll check. A day later, another charge went through. This one was labeled Performance Tier Upgrade. That's when my stomach started to turn. I asked Kian again. He called me this time, voice calm and unbothered. Those are just incentives. You've been improving, and the system adjusts accordingly. It's automatic. Incentives? I asked. I'm being charged more for doing well. He chuckled. Sort of. It's like a performance-based model. The idea is that as your commitment increases, so does our investment in you. That sounded like nonsense. But I didn't want to argue. Not yet. I convinced myself it would balance out, that maybe something really had glitched. But the charges didn't stop. Over the next 2 weeks, my account leaked money. Sometimes it was $20, sometimes it was over 100. Labels like compliance fee, form correction surcharge, and motivational content access started showing up. I hadn't agreed to any of it, at least not knowingly. I dug out the original contract and read it properly this time. Buried in the fine print was a clause. Client agrees to variable billing based on performance benchmarks and engagement metrics as determined by the trainer. I froze. As determined by the trainer. That meant Kian could decide however he liked. And I had signed it. I brought it up during our next session. He was loading weights onto a barbell when I said, "This clause here, what does it actually mean?" He didn't look up. "It means you're leveling up. You're not just paying for time, you're paying for expertise, progress tracking, and accountability. You want results, right?" I stared at the barbell, heart pounding. But I didn't agree to these extra charges. No one told me. "You signed the form," he said plainly. "It's standard in high responsibility training packages. You're not just here to sweat, you're here to transform." I wanted to argue, to tell him I'd never agreed to be part of some tiered billing scheme. But my voice caught in my throat. He handed me a printout of my billing log. It looked official: dates, codes, training milestones, and multipliers. It even included rest day penalties for sessions I'd skipped while traveling. When I asked about a refund, he shook his head. "Refunds are processed quarterly. You'd have to wait. And if you cancel early, there's a disengagement fee." It felt surreal. I wasn't enrolled in a personal training program. I was trapped in a spreadsheet. Over the next few days, I tried to shield my account. I moved money into a secondary bank, canceled the autopay, he reactivated it, and started keeping cash instead of using my debit card. I skipped a session, then another. I told Kian I was out of town. He didn't push back, but the charges kept hitting. I texted him, "I need to stop this. Please reverse the extra fees." He replied, "I'll process a partial refund, minus the service adjustment." That refund? It was $23.87. The service adjustment? $39. I felt like I was drowning. I reached out to a friend who's a paralegal. She reviewed the contract and winced. "This is sketchy," she said. "But technically you consented. It's designed to intimidate." She advised me to go to a small claims clinic. I did. They helped me draft a formal demand letter, citing consumer protection violations and predatory billing practices. I sent it to Kian and copied the gym owner. 3 days later, the charges stopped. A week after that, I received a partial refund. Enough to bring my account back to zero, but not enough to cover everything I'd lost. I considered pursuing it legally, but didn't have the energy. I returned to the gym to pick up a sweater I'd left in my locker. Kian's corner was empty. His mat rolled up. His locker cleared. When I asked the front desk, they said he'd moved on to another opportunity. I stared at the space where he used to stand, barking out reps and nodding as I pushed through another set. It felt like an echo, like I'd been part of a system he designed to exploit. I canceled my gym membership that day. Now I train at a community center where I pay in cash, 1 session at a time. No contracts, no performance metrics, just me, a pair of dumbbells, and a laminated workout sheet. There's no dramatic victory in this story. No final confrontation, just a slow, bitter realization that I let someone wrap legalese around my progress and call it growth. I still lift, still track my reps, but now I read every form I sign, every line. It was a Sunday morning in late October when I decided to try something different. Signed up for a rooftop yoga class in the heart of downtown Halifax, figuring it might help shake off the monotony of my weekend routine. No more scrolling through my phone until noon while balancing a half-eaten bagel on my chest. I wanted something new, still quiet, purposeful. When I got to the rooftop, sunlight was slipping between the buildings, casting long shadows across rows of neatly arranged yoga mats. The instructor stood at the front of the group, adjusting a Bluetooth speaker as soft ambient music drifted into the air. That's when I noticed him, Dorian. He moved like he belonged to the rooftop. Calm, fluid, dressed in muted earth tones. He had one of those voices that made you feel like you'd forgotten how to breathe properly until he reminded you. Inhale through the nose, fill the lungs, hold for 4, exhale. I followed his lead, already feeling like I'd made the right choice by showing up. After class, he approached me with a gentle nod. "You've got great alignment," he said, offering a small smile. If you're interested, I hold private sessions in my home studio. Smaller groups. More focus. I hesitated for a moment. The idea of a quiet, dedicated space to practice yoga sounded appealing. I'd been struggling with anxiety for months, and something about the way he spoke made me feel anchored. Sure, I said. I'd like that. A week later, I found myself in his loft on the east end of the city. It was exactly what you'd expect from someone who taught yoga full-time. Minimalist decor, potted plants in every corner, soft lighting, and the scent of sandalwood drifting through the space. There were shelves lined with meditation books, a Himalayan salt lamp glowing beside a stack of neatly folded blankets, and a single camera perched on a high shelf in the corner. The first few sessions were everything I'd hoped for. Dorian was attentive. He adjusted my posture with firm but respectful hands, walked me through breath work that left my mind noticeably quieter, and spoke about mindfulness in a way that never felt preachy. I started keeping a notebook to track my progress, jotting down how much deeper I could fold, how stable I felt in balancing poses, how different it felt to be present in my body. He made a comment one day after class. "You're really progressing. Would you ever consider letting me record a session? Only for your benefit. Some of my students like to watch their form afterward. It helps refine technique." I didn't even think to hesitate. It felt harmless, useful even. I remembered how often I'd wished for a mirror in class to check my alignment. "Yeah, why not?" I said. Dorian smiled, turned the camera on, and adjusted the angle slightly. "You won't even notice it's there." He wasn't wrong. After a few minutes, I forgot about the lens altogether. I moved through sun salutations and deep twists, listening to his calm directions. After class, he promised to send me the footage so I could review it later. I left feeling proud, empowered even. But the footage never came. A few days passed. When I asked about the video, Dorian apologized, saying he was having upload issues. He promised again to share the file by the weekend. The weekend came and went. Nothing. I didn't push too hard. I figured he was busy or dealing with tech issues. But by the third week, I started to feel uneasy. That's when I received an anonymous message on Instagram. No profile picture. No bio. Just a link and a message. "You might want to see this." I clicked the link before thinking it through. It led to a video page hosted on a site I didn't recognize. There were dozens of clips, different people in yoga poses, all filmed from nearly identical angles, all in the same studio. My stomach dropped when I saw the thumbnail with my name and the date of our session underneath. My video was titled, "Intimate Flow, Perfect Alignment." I clicked it. There I was, frozen in a forward fold, my shirt rising slightly with my breath. My face fully visible. I watched in horror as the camera panned slightly during a deep twist, zooming just enough to feel invasive. The video was tagged under categories that made my skin crawl. I slammed my laptop shut. I sat motionless for a long time, my pulse pounding in my ears. That footage, my footage, was out there. I hadn't signed a release. I hadn't been warned. I trusted him. I texted Dorian immediately. "Why is there video of me online?" No response. I called. Straight to voicemail. I waited 2 hours, pacing my apartment, before he finally messaged back. "It's part of an educational archive. Faces are blurred for privacy." Lies. My face was clear as day. The next day, I showed up at his studio unannounced. He opened the door like nothing was wrong, that same serene expression on his face. "You're early," he said. I didn't even sit down. "Take it down," I said, holding up my phone with the page still open. He glanced at it, then shrugged. "It's meant to help others. You've got great energy. People respond to that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You recorded me without permission and posted it for strangers to watch." He frowned. "I never said it would be private. It's part of a teaching series. People pay to learn from real examples. It's not personal." I wanted to scream. He offered to remove the video if it upset me, but added that there would be a processing delay, and that some content may have already been downloaded by subscribers. My stomach turned. That night, I contacted a friend who works in digital rights. She confirmed that what Dorian had done was illegal. I had every right to issue a takedown, especially since I was fully identifiable and hadn't signed a media release. We drafted a takedown notice and sent it to the site's hosting platform. We also reported the page to every relevant authority we could think of. Within 24 hours, my video disappeared. But I knew it wasn't over. Those clips could still exist, in downloads, on mirrors, in private folders on someone's hard drive. The damage was already done. I canceled my remaining sessions and blocked Dorian's number. I deleted every email he'd ever sent, but his presence lingered. I avoided that part of town for weeks. I stopped practicing yoga. I couldn't even roll out my mat without imagining the red recording light blinking in the corner. Eventually, I found a new studio, small, no frills, located in the basement of a community center. The first thing the instructor said was, "No phones, no cameras, just practice." I nearly cried with relief. It took time, but I slowly returned to myself. I stopped scrutinizing my poses and started listening to my body again. I learned to breathe without fear, to stretch without shame. I still carry the weight of what happened. I still flinch when someone takes out a phone in a shared space. But I've learned to ask questions, to protect my image, my privacy, my peace. Now, when I sign up for a class, I look for the fine print. I ask about recording policies. I don't let anyone tell me it's standard or harmless. It was a Sunday morning in late October when I decided to try something different. Signed up for a rooftop yoga class in the heart of downtown Halifax, figuring it might help shake off the monotony of my weekend routine. No more scrolling through my phone until noon while balancing a half-eaten bagel on my chest. I wanted something new, still quiet, purposeful. When I got to the rooftop, sunlight was slipping between the buildings, casting long shadows across rows of neatly arranged yoga mats. The instructor stood at the front of the group, adjusting a Bluetooth speaker as soft ambient music drifted into the air. That's when I noticed him, Dorian. He moved like he belonged to the rooftop. Calm, fluid, dressed in muted earth tones. He had one of those voices that made you feel like you'd forgotten how to breathe properly until he reminded you. Inhale through the nose, fill the lungs, hold for 4, exhale. I followed his lead, already feeling like I'd made the right choice by showing up. After class, he approached me with a gentle nod. "You've got great alignment," he said, offering a small smile. "If you're interested, I hold private sessions in my home studio. Smaller groups. More focus." I hesitated for a moment. The idea of a quiet, dedicated space to practice yoga sounded appealing. I'd been struggling with anxiety for months, and something about the way he spoke made me feel anchored. "Sure," I said. "I'd like that." A week later, I found myself in his loft on the east end of the city. It was exactly what you'd expect from someone who taught yoga full-time. Minimalist decor, potted plants in every corner, soft lighting, and the scent of sandalwood drifting through the space. There were shelves lined with meditation books, a Himalayan salt lamp glowing beside a stack of neatly folded blankets, and a single camera perched on a high shelf in the corner. The first few sessions were everything I'd hoped for. Dorian was attentive. He adjusted my posture with firm but respectful hands, walked me through breath work that left my mind noticeably quieter, and spoke about mindfulness in a way that never felt preachy. I started keeping a notebook to track my progress, jotting down how much deeper I could fold, how stable I felt in balancing poses, how different it felt to be present in my body. He made a comment one day after class. "You're really progressing. Would you ever consider letting me record a session? Only for your benefit. Some of my students like to watch their form afterward. It helps refine technique." I didn't even think to hesitate. It felt harmless, useful even. I remembered how often I'd wished for a mirror in class to check my alignment. "Yeah, why not?" I said. Dorian smiled, turned the camera on, and adjusted the angle slightly. "You won't even notice it's there." He wasn't wrong. After a few minutes, I forgot about the lens altogether. I moved through sun salutations and deep twists, listening to his calm directions. After class, he promised to send me the footage so I could review it later. I left feeling proud, empowered even, but the footage never came. A few days passed. When I asked about the video, Dorian apologized, saying he was having upload issues. He promised again to share the file by the weekend. The weekend came and went. Nothing. I didn't push too hard. I figured he was busy or dealing with tech issues. But by the third week, I started to feel uneasy. That's when I received an anonymous message on Instagram. No profile picture, no bio, just a link and a message. "You might want to see this." I clicked the link before thinking it through. It led to a video page hosted on a site I didn't recognize. There were dozens of clips, different people in yoga poses, all filmed from nearly identical angles, all in the same studio. My stomach dropped when I saw the thumbnail with my name and the date of our session underneath. My video was titled, "Intimate Flow, Perfect Alignment." I clicked it. There I was, frozen in a forward fold, my shirt rising slightly with my breath, my face fully visible. I watched in horror as the camera panned slightly during a deep twist, zooming just enough to feel invasive. The video was tagged under categories that made my skin crawl. I slammed my laptop shut. I sat motionless for a long time, my pulse pounding in my ears. That footage, my footage, was out there. I hadn't signed a release. I hadn't been warned. I trusted him. I texted Dorian immediately. Why is there video of me online? No response. I called. Straight to voicemail. I waited 2 hours, pacing my apartment, before he finally messaged back. It's part of an educational archive. Faces are blurred for privacy. Lies. My face was clear as day. The next day, I showed up at his studio unannounced. He opened the door like nothing was wrong, that same serene expression on his face. You're early, he said. I didn't even sit down. Take it down, I said, holding up my phone with the page still open. He glanced at it, then shrugged. It's meant to help others. You've got great energy. People respond to that. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You recorded me without permission and posted it for strangers to watch. He frowned. I never said it would be private. It's part of a teaching series. People pay to learn from real examples. It's not personal. I wanted to scream. He offered to remove the video if it upset me, but added that there would be a processing delay and that some content may have already been downloaded by subscribers. My stomach turned. That night, I contacted a friend who works in digital rights. She confirmed that what Dorian had done was illegal. I had every right to issue a takedown, especially since I was fully identifiable and hadn't signed a media release. We drafted a takedown notice and sent it to the site's hosting platform. We also reported the page to every relevant authority we could think of. Within 24 hours, my video disappeared. But I knew it wasn't over. Those clips could still exist, in downloads, on mirrors, in private folders on someone's hard drive. The damage was already done. I canceled my remaining sessions and blocked Dorian's number. I deleted every email he'd ever sent. But his presence lingered. I avoided that part of town for weeks. I stopped practicing yoga. I couldn't even roll out my mat without imagining the red recording light blinking in the corner. Eventually, I found a new studio, small, no frills, located in the basement of a community center. The first thing the instructor said was, no phones, no cameras, just practice. I nearly cried with relief. It took time, but I slowly returned to myself. I stopped scrutinizing my poses and started listening to my body again. I learned to breathe without fear, to stretch without shame. I still carry the weight of what happened. I still flinch when someone takes out a phone in a shared space. But I've learned to ask questions, to protect my image, my privacy, my peace. Now, when I sign up for a class, I look for the fine print. I ask about recording policies. I don't let anyone tell me it's standard or harmless. I started piecing together what Zara had really been doing. She wasn't building a community. She was building a network, one she could monitor in real time. She had volunteers embedded in neighborhoods across the city, and with enough data, she could sell insights to whoever wanted them. Retailers looking to track foot traffic, political campaigns mapping engagement zones, maybe even surveillance contractors. I revisited one of her emails and noticed a line I'd overlooked. We're expanding our reach every day. I had assumed she meant outreach. Now I wasn't so sure. I contacted the city's data protection office, filed a complaint. They told me to expect a slow process. These things take time, they said, and there's often little proof unless someone confesses. I didn't wait for justice. Instead, I focused on cleaning up. I did a full device reset. Deleted every app one didn't absolutely need. I stopped signing up for newsletters, stopped clicking on Learn More. I started asking questions. What will you do with my data? Will this track me? Can I opt out? People looked at me like I was paranoid. Maybe I was, but I'd rather be cautious than naive. I went back to that park months later. The booths were gone. In their place were cherry trees in bloom, pink petals swirling in the wind like confetti. I sat on a bench and thought about Zara, about how easily I'd handed over my trust because someone sounded like they cared. Maybe she did care. Maybe she just cared more about her cause than the people she used to support it. I still believe in clean energy. I still want a better world. But now I read the fine print. I ask for transparency. I don't let passion blind me to manipulation. Ayana jokes that I've turned into a privacy nut. Maybe I have. But when you've had your life mapped without consent, You start to see every QR code as a potential trap. There's no neat ending to this story. Zara never reappeared. No one from her group confessed. The city never followed up. But I carry the lesson with me like a scar. These days, I wear a pin on my jacket that says, "Ask me first." The first time I saw her, it was at an open mic in a warehouse-turned-art space on the edge of town. The walls were raw brick, the floor scuffed concrete, and the stage lit with a single spotlight that flickered every few minutes. I was sipping a lukewarm cider, waiting for my friend's set, when she stepped up to the mic. Her name was Helena. She didn't announce it, just started reciting a poem about discipline, order, and the freedom that comes from surrender. Her voice was low, steady, and somehow brighter than the spotlight. People leaned in. I froze. Afterward, I found her standing near the back wall, sipping herbal tea from a thermos. "Your words hit hard," I said. She turned, smiled like she'd been expecting me. Most people don't stay for the second layer. Whatever that meant, I wanted to know more. We started seeing each other casually. First for poetry readings, then longer walks, then dinners where she barely touched her food, but devoured silence like it fed her more. She spoke often about cleansing the mind and moving beyond flesh distractions. I thought it was metaphor. Then one evening, she invited me to a gathering. "It's quiet," she said. "We talk about purpose. What's worth keeping? What can be released?" I followed her to a small flat with floor cushions arranged in a perfect circle. The others greeted me with soft nods. They each wore lapel pins shaped like open eyes. That first session was about clarity. Helena spoke about detaching from the noise of the world, about how desire clouds judgment. I found myself nodding. It felt good to listen, to be still. I went back the next week, and the one after that. Soon I was part of their core group, 8 of us, all under 30, all looking for something that didn't come with a notification tone. We shared journals. We meditated. Helena led us in long discussions about purity, not just of the body, but of intention. Then, during a session titled Irreversible Devotion, she handed out pamphlets. They were printed on thick, cream-colored paper. The title read, "The Final Sacrifice, Securing Your Higher Path." I flipped through it slowly, my throat tightening. It wasn't metaphor. It was about sterilization, voluntary procedures, a physical vow to stay focused, undistracted. Biological urges, the pamphlet read, lead to compromise. True commitment requires permanence. I looked up. No one else seemed surprised. Helena caught my gaze. "This isn't for everyone," she said gently. "But leaders go first." My heart pounded. "But this is permanent." She nodded. "So is clarity." That night, I barely slept. I kept rereading the pamphlet, trying to convince myself it was theoretical. A test. But the next day, she sent me a clinic address. "Just a consultation," she said. "You don't have to decide today." I went. The clinic was clean, quiet. The nurse spoke in soft tones, asked if I had any doubts. I asked about reversibility. She offered a brochure on egg preservation, just in case. That made it worse. I left without scheduling anything. Helena texted me that evening. "Did it go well? You don't have to rush. But we believe in you." I didn't reply. For 3 days, I went silent. I stopped attending meetings. I didn't answer her calls. I walked the river path by myself, trying to remember who I was before all this. On the 4th day, I returned to the warehouse where we first met. It was empty. A new flyer was taped to the door. Sound bath and somatic healing, Saturdays at 6. No mention of Helena. I never saw her again. I deleted the group chat. Tossed the pin. I told my closest friend what had happened, and she held my hand like she was afraid I might still go back. I still remember the night I wandered into that renovated loft in East Portland, the walls plastered with glow-in-the-dark flyers for every other micro-startup imaginable. The air smelled like burnt kettle corn and expired energy drinks, and every conversation buzzed with talk of redefining the marketplace. I'd shown up on a whim. My friends canceled last minute, so I slipped in solo, telling myself this was one of those events where you might actually meet someone who shares your wavelength. That's how I met Jules. He was leaning against a high-top table, spinning a custom-printed coaster between his fingers. Hoodie zipped halfway, that easy smile like he was in on some private joke. He told me he was part of a team launching a dating app that used machine learning to match people based on the songs in their SoundCloud playlists, and the memes they shared at 2 a.m. in group chats. I didn't know whether to laugh or be impressed. A dating app that cared about your midnight weirdness? I was intrigued. Jules pulled out his phone and showed me a sleek prototype, bright interface, a few placeholder profiles, and a bold promise that this would change the way people connect. He said they were about to roll out a closed beta, and that I should be one of the first testers. My heart did that little nervous flutter, the thrill of something new, mixed with the unease of giving away too much. He asked for my email, my phone number, even my workplace address, so they could send a special welcome kit. I gave him everything, my fingers crossed that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something cool. The next few days, I was glued to my inbox. But the app launch kept getting pushed. First a week, then server issues, then minor tweaks to the algorithm. Meanwhile, my email started filling up with weird pitches, brands I'd never heard of offering me partnerships and targeted ad packages. All of them mentioned the beta. All of them knew far too much about me. At first, I brushed it off as spam, but the timing was too on the nose. It felt like someone was tracking every click, every site I visited, every tag I used. When I finally messaged Jules, he replied breezily, "Oh, those are our launch partners. Totally standard. Helps cover back-end costs." His tone was casual, the kind where you're expected not to ask more questions. But something in my gut twisted. I started digging through the email headers, tracing them back to marketing firms I recognized from my LinkedIn suggestions, companies I definitely hadn't authorized to access my profile or scrape my data for campaigns. By day 5, my online life felt hijacked. I posted a status about watching old sci-fi reruns, and an hour later, a drone company messaged me with a special offer. I uploaded a photo of my lunch, and a meal kit service asked if I'd like to be an ambassador. It was like someone had plugged into my brain. That's when it hit me, this wasn't a beta test. Jules had handed off my data like some free sample at a tech expo. I called him, straight to voicemail. I texted, left on read. I even tried messaging through the app, but the link he'd sent me was dead. Just a blank page with a logo that faded every time I refreshed. I panicked. I spent the next afternoon changing every password I could remember. Revoked app permissions. Googled things like "stop data harvesting now." My living room looked like a scene from a conspiracy movie. Post-it notes with scribbled passwords everywhere. Old notebooks open to login attempts. My roommate walked in and asked why the place looked like I'd been robbed. I mumbled something about digital hygiene. He just nodded, probably chalking it up to my usual spiral. Weeks passed. Then an email from Jules appeared out of nowhere. He said the app had pivoted into a user analytics platform. Offered me a refund for a subscription I never signed up for. The message landed in my spam folder, which felt too poetic to be accidental. I didn't reply. Eventually, I carved out a new routine. No more quizzes that promised to tell me what kind of bread I am. No more dropping my number for a discount code. I took a slow digital detox. An afternoon without my phone, a weekend unplugged. Small things, but they helped. I never saw Jules again. Not in person, anyway. Every now and then, I'll get an email from a disruptive startup asking me to join a focus group. I resist the urge to reply. These days, if an app asks to sync with my calendar or scan my Spotify, I delete it, no questions asked. It's not that I hate innovation. I just learned the hard way that free can cost you more than money. There was no grand showdown, no dramatic closure. Just the long, slow process of rebuilding trust in myself. In what I click. In what I believe. Now, whenever I see a neon-lit warehouse full of early adopters and branded coasters, I remember Jules' smile, and how it masked something way less friendly. And I stick to the free snacks. The year was 1979. America was still reeling from the ghosts of Watergate and Vietnam, and the glitter-soaked optimism of disco was starting to rot under the surface. In my hometown of San Diego, the sun still shined like we were living in a postcard, but behind the smiles were whispers. Missing girls, murders in the hills, darkness hiding behind all that California light. I was 17, naive, restless, still living with my parents in a quiet suburb where every lawn was mowed and every neighbor watched you from behind their curtains. Nothing happened in my neighborhood, and maybe that was the problem. I wanted something to happen. That's when I met him. His name was Danny. He said he was 25, though he looked a few years older. He had the kind of face you'd expect to see on a magazine cover, sharp jaw, perfect smile, eyes like melted chocolate. He wore a leather jacket even when it was 80 degrees out, and he drove a silver Camaro that rumbled like a beast when it pulled up to the curb. I met him at the beach. I was with a friend, walking barefoot along the edge of the water when he approached us. He asked for a light, even though he already had one. My friend giggled. I rolled my eyes, but when he asked for my number, I gave it to him. He called the next day, asked if I wanted to go out Friday night. I said yes without hesitating. When he pulled up to my house, my dad watched him from the front window. "He looks like trouble," he said, sipping his beer. "That's the point," I whispered. Our first date was electric. He took me to a drive-in movie, then to a burger joint that was open late. He asked me about my dreams, my favorite bands, my childhood. He listened like it all mattered. When he kissed me goodnight, it was slow and soft, and I felt like I was floating. It didn't matter that he was older, or that he never talked about his job, or that he always changed the subject when I asked about his family. I was hooked. We saw each other every weekend. He'd pick me up late, always late, and we'd drive aimlessly through the city. Downtown. Balboa Park. The cliffs above La Jolla, where we'd sit in his car and smoke and watch the waves crash against the rocks. He had this way of making everything feel cinematic, like we were in our own movie, like we were the only two people in the world. But there were warning signs. I just didn't want to see them. He never wanted to meet during the day. He refused to come inside my house. He never gave me his address. And sometimes, when he kissed me, he'd grab the back of my neck just a little too tightly. Like he forgot I wasn't something he owned. One night, things went too far. We were parked in a canyon overlook, the city lights glittering below us. We were kissing, and I thought it would be like before. But then his hands started to move. Rough. Demanding. I told him to slow down. He didn't. When I tried to push him away, his grip tightened. His fingers wrapped around my throat, not enough to choke, but enough to scare me. His eyes didn't look like his eyes anymore. They were empty. Cold. "Just relax," he whispered. I panicked. Kicked. Scratched. Finally, he let go. He stared at me for a long time, like he was deciding something. Then he turned the key in the ignition and drove me home without saying a word. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not my friends. I was ashamed. Embarrassed that I'd fallen for someone like him. I told myself it was just a bad night. A misunderstanding. I tried to move on. But I couldn't stop thinking about that look in his eyes. A few months later, I was watching TV with my mom. One of those cheesy game shows, The Love Connection or something like that. It was background noise while we ate dinner on the couch. Then I saw him. Danny. He was one of the contestants. Smiling. Winking. Telling the audience how much he loved photography and long walks on the beach. My fork clattered to the floor. I couldn't breathe. I tried to tell my mom, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain that the charming contestant on national television was the same man who'd tried to hurt me in a canyon outside the city? I didn't say anything. I should have. 2 weeks later, I saw him on the news. His real name wasn't Danny. It was Marcus Delaney. He'd been arrested in connection with the disappearance of a teenage girl from Chula Vista. Her body was found in the hills. Strangled. Mutilated. As the investigation unfolded, more victims surfaced. Girls from San Diego, Riverside, even as far north as Bakersfield. All of them young. All of them pretty. All of them last seen with a man who looked just like the one I'd kissed in the dark. I went to the police. I told them everything. They took my statement, asked me dozens of questions, showed me photos I'll never forget. I was lucky. I know that now. I don't know why he let me go that night. Maybe he got scared. Maybe I fought harder than he expected. Or maybe he just wasn't ready yet. But I've never forgiven myself for keeping quiet, for not saying something sooner, for not warning someone. Because maybe if I had, that girl from Chula Vista would still be alive. I'd been a server at the Crimson Fig for 3 years. The tips were decent, and the hours didn't totally destroy my sanity. But nothing makes you question your love life like wiping down linen napkins someone used to blot lipstick after whispering, "I love you," over oysters. So about a week before Valentine's, I caved and downloaded Tinder again. I didn't expect much. Mostly, I wanted to remind myself that somewhere out there, someone might still want to match with a guy who barely had time to text back, and whose idea of a romantic evening was collapsing on the couch with leftover pad thai. Scrolling through Tinder profiles was like sorting through a landfill. Half of them were gym selfies and cringy bios. Sushi and sarcasm. Dog mom. Let's make bad decisions. I was about to delete the app when I saw her. Elise. She had this striking look, dark auburn hair, pale skin, and a sleeve of tattoos that blended marine life with religious iconography. An octopus curled around her forearm, its tentacles trailing into a haloed angel with solemn eyes. Her bio was simple: be my Valentine. I swiped right. Instant match. I blinked at my phone. That never happened. Usually it was days before a match came through, if at all. I hesitated, then typed the first thing that came to mind. Hey, so does your Valentine offer still stand? Her reply came almost instantly. It does if you're free after 10:30, love letter. I told her about my shift. She said she didn't mind late nights. Claimed she liked the quiet that came after everyone else had gone to sleep. Something about the way she said it gave me goosebumps. We messaged for a few days. I learned she'd moved to Denver from New Orleans 2 years earlier, said she worked freelance in design, mostly branding and illustration. Her messages were short, direct, no fluff, no emojis. But she always replied quickly. Too quickly. It was like she was always waiting for me to respond. Still, I was into it. She was beautiful, intriguing, and by some miracle, actually wanted to meet up on Valentine's Day. The plan was to grab a late dinner at an all-night spot she liked in 5 Points. I hadn't heard of the place before, but she said the garlic noodles were life-changing. Seemed like a weird choice for a first date, but I didn't care. I finished my shift at the Crimson Fig just after 10:30, changed into a clean shirt, and made my way to the restaurant. It was one of those old-school Asian joints, red lanterns in the window, plastic dragons on the walls, and menus that hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. A mix of charm and decay. Elise was already there, sitting alone at a table near the back. She looked even better in person. Her hair was tied back in a loose braid, and she wore a long, dark coat with silver buttons that caught the light. Her tattoos peeked out from under her sleeves like secrets waiting to be uncovered. I apologized for being late. She just smiled and said, "You came. That's what matters." We sat down and ordered drinks. She asked for hot sake. I got a beer. We made small talk, music, food, the weirdest jobs we'd ever had. She told me about a gig designing labels for a boutique candle company that specialized in scented intentions. I told her about the time a customer tried to tip me with a scratch-off ticket. She laughed, but it was soft, polite, like she was watching herself from the outside. We ordered garlic noodles and spring rolls. She didn't eat much, just pushed the food around her plate and asked me questions. About my family, my childhood, my beliefs. Then, out of nowhere, she asked, "Do you know the story of Saint Valentine?" I shrugged. Not really. Just that he's the reason I had to serve 73 creme brulees tonight. She smiled faintly. He was a priest in Rome, 3rd century. When the Emperor Claudius outlawed marriage, Valentine kept performing ceremonies in secret. For love. Huh. That's kind of romantic. She leaned in slightly. He was caught, tortured, executed. They say it took 3 swings to sever his head. The first blow cracked his spine. The second fractured his jaw. The third finally did it. I blinked. Yeah, I didn't know that part. They say he died with a smile, that he believed his suffering was sacred, that dying for love was the purest act of devotion. The way she said it sent a chill through me. Like she wasn't telling a story, she was reciting something she believed in. I've always wondered, she went on, staring into her untouched sake, what it would feel like to love someone that much. To give everything, even your life. I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. That's some Romeo and Juliet level commitment. She didn't laugh, just looked at me with those hazel eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. I'm serious, she said. Wouldn't you want someone to love you like that? Before I could answer, she stood up. Walk me home, she asked. I hesitated but nodded. Sure. We walked in silence. The streets were empty, the air crisp. She lived in an apartment above an old record store a few blocks east. The building was dark except for a single bulb above the entrance. When we reached her door, she turned to face me. I had a good time, she said. Me too. Then she leaned forward and kissed me. Her lips were soft, cold. She smelled faintly of lavender and something metallic. Come upstairs, she whispered. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something in my gut screamed no. I have to be up early, I lied. Double shift tomorrow. Her face didn't change. Her tone didn't waver. Another time, then. Absolutely. She stepped inside and closed the door. I walked home with my heart pounding. The next morning, there was a package on my doorstep. A small, red box tied with a black ribbon. Inside was a stuffed bear. Handmade. Roughly stitched. Its eyes were two buttons, one black, one red. Pinned to its chest was a heart. Not a cartoon heart. A real one. Small. Raw. Still wet. There was a card. Be my Valentine. I threw up in the sink. I called the police. Filed a report. The officer was polite, but clearly didn't believe me. Probably a prank, he said. Ex-girlfriend? Roommate with a dark sense of humor? I changed my number. Deleted the app. Started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. But it didn't stop. I'd find messages carved into my mailbox. Love is pain. True devotion is sacrifice. Once, I came home to find my bedroom window open and a bouquet of dead roses on my bed. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No leads. She never contacted me again. Not directly. But I know she's still out there. Waiting. Watching. Looking for someone to love her enough to die for it. Dating in your 30s is like shopping at a thrift store after a clearance sale. Everything that's left is either broken, weirdly shaped, or hiding some kind of defect you won't notice until it's too late. So when I joined a dating site that promised to match mature singles with unique interests, I wasn't expecting much. I'd been out of college for over a decade, working a pretty dull job managing a warehouse in the outskirts of Cincinnati. I wasn't a bar guy. I wasn't into apps where people matched based on shirtless selfies and dog filters. I wanted something with substance, or at least someone who could hold a conversation without trying to sell me essential oils or pitch an NFT. Her name was Violet. She messaged me first. That should have been the first red flag. Her profile was sparse, just a few pictures and a bio that read, "Looking for someone who appreciates the strange and beautiful." I clicked through her photos. One of her in what looked like a vintage field coat, standing in the middle of an overgrown garden. Another, black and white, her face half covered by her bangs, lips painted a dark plum. She looked like she'd stepped out of a 1970s art house film. She wasn't conventionally attractive, but there was something about her that pulled me in. A kind of stillness in her expression. A deliberate quietness, like she was waiting for you to ask the right question. We messaged back and forth a few times. It was slow at first, 1 or 2 exchanges a day. She didn't use emojis. She typed in full sentences. She asked thoughtful questions. She had this old-fashioned way of speaking, like someone who read a lot of classic literature but didn't brag about it. I found it refreshing. Eventually, we agreed to meet for drinks at a place she suggested, a dive bar called the Velvet Antler, tucked inside a crumbling building off the highway. It was the kind of spot you'd miss if you blinked. The inside was dimly lit, with cracked leather booths and walls plastered with faded deer heads and torn concert posters. There were no TVs, no music, just the clink of glasses and low murmurs from the few regulars hunched over the bar. I arrived 5 minutes early. She was 15 minutes late. When she finally walked in, every head in the bar turned. Not because she was stunning, but because she didn't belong. She wore a long navy blue coat with brass buttons, her black boots clicking softly on the cracked linoleum. Her bangs were perfectly trimmed, her eyes a sharp, unnatural green. She looked like a ghost who dressed up as a librarian. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her voice low and smooth like velvet soaked in smoke. The cab took a wrong turn. "No worries," I said. "I was starting to think you'd ghosted me." "Ghosts don't make reservations," she replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We sat in a booth near the back. I ordered a beer. She requested a glass of red wine, and the bartender gave her a look like she'd asked for unicorn blood. We talked. Or rather, I talked. She asked questions, nodded, sipped her wine slowly, and listened with that same unreadable expression. I told her about my job. She said she worked part-time at a museum archive, but didn't elaborate. I told her about my dog, Charlie. She said she preferred cats, but had none. I asked her about her favorite authors, and she listed names I didn't recognize, obscure Eastern European writers known for exploring the absurdity of mortality. The smell hit me halfway through my drink. It was subtle at first. Something sour. Metallic. Like spoiled meat left in the sun. I wrinkled my nose and glanced around. The bar was old, sure, but that smell wasn't just mildew or stale beer. It was sharper, riper. "Do you smell that?" I asked, trying to be casual. She looked at me blankly. "Smell what?" I dropped the subject. Maybe it was the plumbing. Or maybe the guy 2 booths over had spilled something in his lap. Still, I was eager to move on. "I know a French place not far from here," I said. "Bit more upscale. Great food. Want to check it out?" She hesitated. Do they serve offal? I blinked. What? Organ meats, she said. Liver, heart. Things with flavor. That should have been warning sign number 2. But I was already invested. She was weird, but weird in a way that made you want to see what happened next. We took a cab to Brasserie du Loup, a dimly lit French restaurant tucked into the corner of a historic downtown block. Velvet curtains, candles on every table, waiters in crisp white shirts and black aprons. It was the kind of place that made you instinctively lower your voice. The waiter seated us at a small table near the window. I ordered a bottle of red. Violet studied the menu with a strange intensity, her eyes flicking from one dish to the next like she was reading a spell book. When the waiter returned, she tapped the menu delicately. I'll have the foie de veau lyonnaise, she said, her tone almost reverent. But tell the chef not to cook the liver. The waiter froze. You want the veal liver, raw? Yes, she said. No flame. No sear. Just sliced. Room temperature is fine. He glanced at me. I shrugged, trying not to look alarmed. I'm not hungry, I added quickly. Just the wine for me. The waiter left, looking visibly disturbed. I wanted to say something. Ask her what the hell that was about. But she just stared at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. I don't eat things that are dead on the inside, she said softly. What does that mean? I asked. Some food is lifeless. Sterile. Cooked until it loses its essence. And raw meat doesn't? She shook her head. Raw meat is still honest. You can taste the truth in it. I laughed nervously. That's one way to put it. Her meal arrived 20 minutes later. The waiter placed the plate in front of her with visible reluctance. Thin, bloody slices of veal liver glistened under the flicker of candlelight. The smell was worse now, iron-rich, pungent, and cloying. She didn't use utensils. She picked up each slice with her fingers, lifting it delicately to her lips and biting into it with slow, deliberate movements. Blood smeared the corners of her mouth. She chewed with her eyes closed, like she was savoring a memory. Around us, other diners were starting to notice. I could feel their stares. One couple looked absolutely horrified. I wanted to crawl under the table. I should go, I said, standing up. She looked up, tilting her head. Why? I've got an early shift. At work. You work nights? Sometimes. She nodded, licking her fingers. That's a shame. I was hoping you'd come back to my apartment. I have something I want to show you. She said it like she was inviting me to a funeral. I'll have to take a rain check, I said, forcing a smile. But thanks for dinner. I left cash on the table and practically bolted out the door. Outside, I took a few deep breaths, trying to shake off the nausea. I caught a cab and told the driver to take me home. I didn't look back, but she wasn't done with me. Over the next week, I started seeing signs. A raw chicken liver left on the hood of my car. A napkin with my name written in red ink. At least, I hope it was ink, stuffed into my mailbox. Once, I came home to find a single, uncooked kidney sitting in a plastic container on my doorstep. There were no notes, no explanations, just offerings. I filed a police report shortly afterwards for my safety. Being single on Valentine's Day sucks. It sucks even more when you work at a trendy restaurant in the middle of downtown Austin, wiping down tables for love-struck couples who are too busy feeding each other forkfuls of filet mignon to notice you're practically bathing in their leftover creme brulee and shame. Don't get me wrong, the Hollow Oak is a great place to work. The tips are respectable, and the staff mostly knows how to keep things professional. But that doesn't make it any easier to spend February 14th watching people flirt and fawn over one another while you're busy bussing their dishes and trying not to think about how long it's been since someone touched your hand with genuine affection. So, in a moment of weakness, or desperation maybe, I re-downloaded Tinder. I told myself it was just for fun, just to browse. But deep down, I was hoping I might find someone, anyone, who could make me feel something besides exhausted and invisible. At first, it was the usual mess. Profiles of girls with bios that read like ransom notes. No hookups. Don't waste my time. If you can't handle me at my worst, and so on. I scrolled endlessly, half laughing, half cringing. But just when I was about to delete the app again, I saw her. Her name was Safia. 26. Pharmacy student. Trying to make the world a little better, her bio read. A blurry photo of her in a white lab coat. Another of her standing in front of some beach I couldn't identify. She had this gentle, almost solemn expression in every picture. Like she wasn't trying to look sexy, just honest. I swiped right, more out of admiration than expectation. We matched instantly. I stared at my phone for a few seconds, unsure of what to do. I didn't want to screw this up with a clumsy pickup line or some lame pun, so I just went with something simple. Good morning. I'm guessing you're up early for work. Hope your day goes smoothly. She messaged back within minutes. Morning to you too. Yeah, I start rotations at 7. It's brutal. Thanks for the kind words, smiley face. From there, we started talking. Not just small talk either. Real conversation. We talked about music and terrible first dates. She told me about the time a guy took her to a dog park, then spent the entire time talking about his ex. I told her how I once got ghosted mid-meal, literally. She went to the bathroom and just never came back. Our chats flowed like we'd known each other for years. She was smart, quick-witted, and had this quiet confidence that was incredibly attractive. She didn't try to dazzle me. She didn't flirt aggressively. She didn't need to. After a few days of back and forth, I asked her if she wanted to grab dinner after my shift on Valentine's Day. I half expected her to say she was busy, but instead she replied with, "I'd love to. I hate spending that day alone." We agreed to meet at a Vietnamese place I liked, just off South Lamar. I'd been there a few times, and the food was consistently great. Plus, it stayed open late, which was perfect since my shift wouldn't end until 10:30. When I got there, she was already waiting. She looked even better in person. Tall, with warm brown skin that glowed under the soft light of the red lanterns hanging above the booth. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple black coat that made her look elegant without trying. I apologized for being late, but she waved it off. "You work. It happens." We ordered drinks, just tea for her, jasmine and strong. I went for a beer. She let me pick the dishes, since she confessed she wasn't super familiar with Vietnamese food. I recommended the chicken pho and some crispy spring rolls. Conversation was easy at first. We talked about Austin, how she'd moved from Milwaukee 2 years ago to pursue her degree. I told her I'd lived here all my life, and she teased me for being the rare local. We joked about college debt, bad roommates, and our mutual hatred of cilantro. But then, somewhere after the second round of drinks, the tone shifted. I asked about her family. Just a casual, "So, what do your folks think of you being all grown up and saving lives?" She smiled faintly. "My dad's proud, I think. He's always been complicated. Oh yeah, he works for the government. Back in Zimbabwe. Pretty high up too." I blinked. "Wow, like in healthcare?" She hesitated. "No, security. He was in the police force for years. Now he oversees things." Her tone was flat. There was no pride, no warmth in the way she said it. Just facts, delivered carefully. "That must be intense." "It is. He's a strong man. Respected. Feared even. Sometimes both." I didn't know what to say to that, so I asked about her mom. "She sent me here. For school. Said it was safer. More opportunities." There was a pause. I could feel the weight in the air, like something heavy had settled between us. I wanted to change the subject, but she beat me to it. "How about your parents?" I told her about my dad's obsession with classic rock and my mom's terrible cooking. She laughed, really laughed, for the first time that night. It felt like a victory. The rest of the evening was pleasant. We ate, we talked, we shared stories about growing up in completely different worlds. When the check came, I insisted on paying. She didn't protest. Outside, the air was crisp and quiet. We stood on the curb for a moment, unsure of what came next. "I'd walk you home," I said, "but I live like 6 blocks that way." She smiled again. "It's okay. I'll call a ride." There was an awkward silence. I wanted to kiss her, but something told me not to push it. Instead, I just said, "I hope we can do this again." "Yeah," she said. "Me too." She got into the car, and I stood there watching until it turned the corner and vanished into the night. For the next 2 days, I walked around in a daze. I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she spoke. The way her eyes held things she didn't say. I texted her the next morning, thanked her for the evening. She replied a few hours later. "I had a good time. Let's talk soon." But then nothing. No messages. No replies. Just silence. I didn't want to come off as clingy, so I waited. Told myself she was busy. Exams maybe. Work. Life. But after a week, I cracked. I sent one more message. A long one. I said I wasn't trying to bother her, but I just wanted to know if she was okay. That if she didn't want to see me again, that was fine. I just didn't like the not knowing. The reply came almost immediately. but it wasn't from her number. It just said, "Don't contact her again. Forget Sofia." My stomach dropped. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. I typed back, "Who is this?" Another message. This one was just my address. Street name. Apartment number. Zip code. I felt my blood turn to ice. I jumped up, ran to the window, and scanned the street. Nothing. Just the usual cars. The faint hum of streetlights buzzing. The message had come from a blocked number. I couldn't trace it. I couldn't report it. It was like someone had slipped into my world, left a note on my pillow, and vanished again. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep the night after that either. I was too afraid to. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be some ex of hers. Someone jealous. Possessive. Maybe she'd made the mistake of using Tinder while still technically in a relationship. I'd heard of that happening. I told myself I wasn't in danger, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been watched. That someone knew more about me than they should. A month passed. Life moved on. I deleted Tinder. Went back to work. Tried to forget. Until last week. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I was just curious. Maybe I wanted closure. But I Googled her name, just to see if I could find her on social media. There was nothing. No Instagram. No Facebook. No Twitter. No LinkedIn. It was like she'd never existed. Except, I did find something. A news article. Foreign. Buried deep on the third or fourth page of search results. It was about a recent political shift in Zimbabwe. A new president had seized power in a bloodless coup. The article described how he'd installed his children into key positions of power within the country's intelligence and security departments. One of the names was familiar. Too familiar. The article went on to describe how political dissidents were being tortured, how prisoners were subjected to extreme interrogation methods involving powerful psychoactive drugs, isolation cells, and shock therapy. I felt my throat tighten as I read. The man's nickname, translated roughly, was the surgeon. I shut my laptop and sat there in silence. Her words came back to me. My dad's respected. Feared. He oversees things. He's a strong man. I thought of her eyes. Dark, unreadable. The way she smiled without showing her teeth. The way she never told me where she lived. The way she vanished. I took my phone. Pulled out the SIM card. Flushed it. I walked down to the river near my apartment and tossed the phone into the water. I grew up in a town called Greenridge, tucked away in northern Minnesota. It was the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and wave at strangers. Nothing too exciting ever happened there, but it was safe, consistent, predictable. I used to think that was a good thing. Then I met Aiden. He came from 2 towns over, and we met through friends at a summer concert in Duluth. He was tall, with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow and eyes that seemed to hold a storm behind them. A little aloof, a little intense. Exactly the kind of guy I'd always imagined falling for. He wasn't like the boys at my high school, who only cared about trucks and beer. Aiden had this mysterious energy, like he was always thinking about something deeper. At first, everything was perfect. He'd drive over on weekends, pick me up in his old Jeep, and take me out to the movies, to diners, to the edge of the lake where we'd sit and talk under the stars. He always paid, always opened doors. I thought he was a romantic. My friends teased me about how smitten I was, and I didn't even try to deny it. But things started to shift. He began texting me constantly, morning, noon, and night. At first, I thought it was sweet, but then the messages became more explicit. Not playful or flirtatious, but graphic. Uncomfortable. When I finally asked him to tone it down, he apologized and said he didn't mean to upset me. He said he just thought I was too beautiful not to imagine. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he meant well. Eventually, I felt ready to take the next step. I was 18, still a virgin, and while I was nervous, I trusted him. We talked about renting a cabin for a weekend, just the 2 of us. He was thrilled. But that's when the fantasies he shared began to get strange. He talked about control, about tying me up, about training me. At first I thought it was just role play, a kink I didn't fully understand. But the more he shared, the more disturbed I became. He wasn't just into the idea of dominance. He was obsessed with it. It felt like he didn't see me as a person, just something he could mold. When I told him I wasn't comfortable with it, he flipped. He called me cold, accused me of misleading him, said I was too boring to ever satisfy someone like him. The venom in his words shocked me. It was like someone had ripped off the mask of the guy I thought I knew. We didn't speak for days after that. I figured we were done, and honestly, I was relieved. I started to process what had happened, how close I'd come to giving myself to someone who didn't respect me. Then one Saturday morning, I saw him downtown. He was with another girl, holding her hand. I froze. All the hurt, the confusion, the anger, it all surged up at once. I confronted him right there on the sidewalk. I yelled. I cried. I didn't even care who was watching. He denied everything, twisted my words, made me out to be the crazy one. The new girl just stared at us, caught in the crossfire. I stormed away, heart pounding, tears blurring my vision. I deleted his number, blocked him on every app, and swore I'd put him behind me. But then I saw the news. A week later, local channels were flooded with stories about a missing girl, Maddie Jensen. Her photo was everywhere. I recognized her instantly. She was Aiden's younger stepsister. We'd met a few times. She was bright, kind, and so full of life. I couldn't believe it. My stomach twisted when they said Aiden had been arrested. It turned out that he and his new girlfriend had lured Maddie away under the pretense of hanging out. Only they hadn't taken her home. They'd taken her to an abandoned property outside of town. The details that came out during the trial were horrific, things I wish I could scrub from my memory. He hadn't just wanted control. He wanted to own someone, to break them. And when I remembered the things he'd said to me, the messages he'd sent, I realized how close I'd come to being next. I told my parents everything. They were horrified. My mom cried and held me for hours. My dad looked like he wanted to drive to the jail and confront Aiden himself. I gave a statement to the police, told them what I'd experienced. It didn't bring Maddie back, but it helped paint the full picture of who he really was. People often say girls have it easy when it comes to dating, that we have our pick, that we're the ones holding all the power. But let me tell you, sometimes it's not just difficult. Sometimes it's deadly. I've never claimed to be a good person. If anything, I pride myself on my ability to take advantage of others. The way I see it, the whole system is built on manipulation, people using each other to get ahead. So why should I pretend to be any different? I've made thousands scamming desperate strangers out of their money, men and women alike, starved for attention and love, clinging to the idea that someone out there might actually care about them. They never see it coming. They never question the photos, the messages, the sob stories. They just open their wallets and send their savings hurtling across the digital void. I'm a catfish. And this is how I almost died because of it. It always starts the same way. I create a fake profile, usually on Instagram or Facebook. The photos are crucial. Pretty, but not overly glamorous. Girl next door types with relatable smiles, and just enough mystery to make someone wonder what else they're hiding. I usually find a real profile to lift from, then block the original person so they can't report me. Once the profile's set, it's time to find the marks. Not just one, mind you. I work 5 or 6 at a time. That way, even if only a few pay out, it's still worth the effort. The ideal target isn't too smart, they'll see through the act. But not too clueless either. They can barely work out how to use PayPal. I look for people who are lonely, who post about their bad luck in love, who seem hungry for connection. It's not hard to spot them. Of course, I made a mistake. A big one. His name wasn't really Theo, but that's what we'll call him. Theo stood out from the start. He didn't seem rich, and he wasn't particularly desperate, but he was responsive, attentive, and quick to believe whatever I told him. I spun the usual web, rent due, Christmas coming up, family in trouble, and to my surprise, he didn't hesitate. He sent me $5,000. No questions, no strings, just a note that read, "Hope this helps." I was stunned. I'd never seen that kind of payout in one go. I wrote back with a full emotional thank you message, dripping with gratitude and promises to meet up soon. Naturally, I was curious. Who is this guy? What did he do? He said he worked in IT, that he sold things online. I didn't ask for details. I didn't care. As long as the money came through, I was happy. But when I tried to cut him off, things got weird. I deleted the fake profile, thinking that was the end of it. But a week later, I got a message from an unknown sender. No name, no number, just a photo of a handwritten note. "I know it was you." My stomach dropped. I played dumb. Sent back a casual, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly. "Front door." I froze. I ran downstairs, heart pounding. The street was empty. But right there on my doorstep were 2 hunks of raw meat, bloody, glistening, and horrifying. It wasn't until I looked closer that I realized what I was seeing. A heart. I couldn't tell if it was from a pig or something else, but it didn't matter. Someone had left it there. For me. I kicked the mess aside and went back upstairs, trying to convince myself it was a prank. Maybe one of my friends who knew about the scams was messing with me. I tried to shake it off. That's when my computer acted up. My mouse started moving on its own. I watched in disbelief as the pointer navigated to a blank Word document. Then, slowly, letters appeared on the screen. I know what you did. You're going to pay. No one else was in the room. Someone had taken remote control of my computer. The screen blinked and a browser opened. A video began to play, grainy, shaky footage from what looked like a jungle. A man was kneeling in the dirt, hands tied, while 3 others circled him, speaking quietly in Spanish. One of them raised a machete. I shut the whole system down at the plug. But it wasn't over. My phone rang. A distorted voice whispered threats I'll never forget. I can't reveal how Theo tracked me down. He made me swear I wouldn't. But I can tell you this, I returned the money. Every cent. I offered to pay more, just to make it stop. He said it wasn't about the money. It was about the lesson. Some people, he said, are nothing but sharks in suits, predators in disguise. But others? They're just shadows. Watching. Waiting. And if you cross the wrong one, they won't just ruin your day. They'll ruin your life. I've never catfished anyone since. And I never will again. This one isn't my story, but it happened to my friend Sienna, and since she refuses to write it out herself, I'm doing it on her behalf, with full permission, of course. So a few years ago, Sienna matched with a guy on Bumble while living in Austin. They hit it off immediately. The banter was electric, and before long, their messages started getting intense. Playful, flirty, and eventually full-on spicy. According to her, it was the kind of texting that makes you double-check to see if your neighbors are reading over your shoulder. The guy seemed confident, charming, and knew exactly what to say. He was also really cute, like, I know I shouldn't trust this man, but I will anyway levels of cute. So after a few days of this steamy back and forth, they made plans to meet up for dinner downtown. Here's where it starts to go off the rails. When they actually met in person, he was different. He still looked exactly like his photos, same tousled hair, same deep-set eyes, but he was awkward. Quiet. Shy in a way that didn't match the bold, borderline NSFW conversations they'd been having. Now, people can be different online, especially introverts. Some folks are just more comfortable behind a screen. So Sienna kept it cool and didn't judge. They chatted about music, favorite movies, the usual first date stuff. And slowly, he started to loosen up. After about 45 minutes, he was laughing, telling stories, and generally acting like the person she thought she'd been texting. Then the topic of exes came up, and Sienna, half teasing, decided to reference something flirty he'd said in their Bumble chat. Something mildly suggestive, nothing over the top. She figured it'd make him grin or blush at the memory. Instead, he turned pale. Like, I just watched someone get hit by a bus pale. Then, with a nervous laugh, he said, Okay, I have to admit something. Sienna braced herself. Was he married? Was his name fake? What? Nope. The person you were texting on Bumble, that was my mom. She thought she'd misheard. I'm not great at dating stuff, he went on. So she handles it for me. She usually sets things up and lets me know when and where to go. Sienna blinked. Your mom? He nodded, completely serious. She was horrified. Like, this wasn't just some helicopter parent situation. This was full-on Norman Bates territory. Not only had she been sexting with someone's mother, but she had no idea how much that woman had told her son. Did he know what she'd said? What photos she'd sent? Had he read them? The blood drained from her face. She told him she needed to use the restroom, stood up, and walked straight out of the restaurant without looking back. She called me that night, still crying. She said the whole walk home felt like a fever dream. She couldn't stop replaying the messages she'd sent. The photos. The things she'd confessed. All of it, now tainted by the knowledge that she hadn't been talking to him at all. And the worst part, the guy didn't even seem to understand why it was so disturbing. He thought she'd be impressed by his honesty. Instead, she was traumatized. So yeah, there are red flags, and then there's this. If someone tells you their mom handles their dating life, run. If you feel like you're having the spiciest convo of your life with a guy who seems too good to be true, maybe double check that he's not farming out his Bumble replies to a parent. Dating is weird. But that's another level.